Welcome to Sattva Himalayan Wisdom. Continuing the series through the visionary lens, this episode explores one of the timeless insights on truth and the unified whole.
Ekam Sat, Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. This is a profound insight which arises from one of the oldest living works of our tradition, the Rig Veda. It is found in the first Mandala of the Rig Veda, attributed to the sage Dirghatamas. Ekam Sat, Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. The truth is one. This is a brilliant insight about the unity of underlying reality. Ekam Sat. For Sat is truth. There is a dimension of truth of Sat which is changeless. But how can it be changeless? It can only be changeless if it is subtler than time. So here, when the Rishi is speaking of Ekam Sat, he's speaking of the dimension of knowledge which is subtler than time. It is before time, this Sat. It is singular and timeless. It is Nirgun and it is Nirakal. It is timeless. And so all relative truths arise from it. All manifestations represents ultimately various facets of this indivisible Advaita truth, Sat. For it is only Sat because it does not change in time. It remains. Irrespective of what time you are in the relative field, this truth remains the truth. Just like right now, each and every one of us knows that we are on a planet revolving around a luminous ball of fire, our magnificent Surya. And it is the truth. We are revolving around the sun. It has been true for a very long time and it will be true. But what if you were observing from the galactic center? Then are the planets going around the sun or they are going around the galactic center? For as you know, our sun, together with the whole galaxy, is revolving around the galactic center. Which none of us know actually what's in that galactic center. But that is the truth. But imagine 4.5 billion years from now, or 5 billion years from now, when the sun, our sun, ultimately expands and ceases to be the way it is. Expands and collapses. Then the solar system would cease to be. So then in that moment, if you were to say the planets are moving around our sun, then it wouldn't be true. Even though it is a very fundamental truth right now. So even this truth, which is so consistent to our experience, is temporal in nature. So when here the Rishi is saying, Ekam Sat, the truth is one. He is speaking of that dimension of truth which is subtler than time. Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. Ekam Sat, Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. Ekam Sat, that the truth is one. But Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. Vadanti is expression. So in a literal meaning, Ekam means one. Sat, truth, reality. Vipra is wise beings. Vipra, Sanskrit word for wise. Vipra is also speaking of beings in a state of inspiration, who are in a state of high alertness. Vipra, high Shakti is flowing, so in a state of high prana. So this Vipra, beings in a state of great unity, that inspiration arises. Vipra, beings who are in a state of deep inspiration. Bahuda, diverse. Vadanti, describe, speak. So the truth is one. or there is that one underlying truth, indivisible whole, that gets expressed by inspired wise beings differently at different stages of relative time. Every insight that gets expressed adds to the understanding of that Sat in the relative timeline. For that Sat exists independent of this relative timeline. It includes all relative values of truth, all point of views of truth, all different perspectives of it, yet transcends them all. So this is a profound statement written thousands of years ago, pointing to the underlying unity of this existence. That even though we might use different names, different sages, different teachers, different traditions might use different names, different language, but what they are trying to speak or share of ultimately is aspects of that only, Sat. For that Sat is one and whole. And when we say one, it does not mean like a sentence or an idea, but that one means it is the vastness, the wholeness, indivisible whole. It includes all boundaries, but it is ultimately boundless. And so when we realize this, then we realize that there is underlying truth, underlying reality to all diversity is this field of unity, that is Sat. And so we find in life what? That on that transcendent level, the underlying field of unity persists, while on the relative level, diversity persists. And this diversity is not an opposition to the unity, but rather an essential component of that unity. These are not two opposing values. The underlying unity maintains its essential nature, while on the relative level, we have infinite diversity, consistently persistent in time. And so when we can begin to realize that if we are truly genuinely interested as individuals and as a species to evolve, then we have to begin to understand that no ideology can have a copyright on truth. Obviously, there are some theories, some understandings, some insights which are better than others, which are much more in alignment than others. For there are certain ideologies and certain theories which are absolutely tamasic, dense. And there are certain which are much better explanations, much more in alignment. But if we are truly interested, then we have to stop looking at them as opposition, as a war of right versus wrong, but rather, if we are truly interested in growth, we have to be interested in being wise. For wisdom is not about right or wrong, but rather gaining a greater level of holistic understanding. As the 12 blind men clinging to the elephant, each saying, okay, the elephant looks like this, an elephant looks like this, and the great sage comes and he says, you are all right, but you're also all wrong. This is this Ekam Sat, Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. So even though We might use, even on the spiritual level, might use different words as God, Allah, light, existence. We don't get so tied up with the words and get focused on how my word is better than your word. But rather, if we are truly interested in freedom, we have to be interested in gaining greater understanding. The greater our aperture, the more capacity do we have of understanding relative values of truth. The more access we have to Ekam Sat, the more is our capacity to understand diverse expressions of that truth. Bahudha Vadanti. That is ultimately what maturity is of the Atman. Or when we say an old soul, when we are talking about an old soul, we are not talking about an old soul that the age of the soul is, oh, this soul is 5 years old and this soul is 10 years old and this soul is 100 years old. No, when we are talking about an old soul, we are speaking of what is the level of understanding, the level of maturity, the level of wisdom the soul has. And so the maturity of the soul is not on the level of chronological years, but rather on the level of depth of understanding. And so a mature soul is one who has deeper access to the field of Sat, Ekam Sat, that boundless field of Sat. That's where the Rishi lives, that's where the Yogi lives. And that access is dynamic, it's not static. So you keep deepening that access to the field of Sat. As you have that deepening into the field of Sat, then your ability to understand Vipra Bahudha Vadanti, the distinct expressions of how that truth expresses in different values of time through different locations in time and space, through different mouthpieces, through different teachers, through different theories, to different scientists, to different philosophers, then you are not confused. You are able to see the truth, the elements of truth in all this, and you are able to also see that which is not. Like the swan of Saraswati, in our tradition we say, Hangsa of Saraswati, the swan of Saraswati, is said to, even if you mix milk and water together, and you ask the swan to take the milk, it will be able to take the milk and leave the water behind. That is the status of the individual who starts to go deep within the field of Ekam. That we are not confused, no more in conflict, no more stuck in narrow bandwidth of opinions, of my opinion versus your opinion. We are no more just in the business of trying to gain certain status by holding on to certain rigid opinions, to some rigid ideologies which are fundamentally based in fragmentation, fragmented understanding. We are no more insecure in our knowledge. For true knowledge should liberate us. It should not generate insecurity. When we are truly understanding, when we truly have access to Sat, that Sat starts to liberate us. Then our idea of God is not a handicap. Otherwise, we find a lot of people believe in God. But their belief in God creates violence in them. For their idea of God, when it is in conflict with someone else's idea of God, then you have religious wars. How can your idea of God lead you to conflict with someone else's idea of God? How can that have anything to do with Sat? That is not Sat, that is Asat. And as we said, Asato ma sadgamaya, may we be led from untruth to truth. And for that to happen, we have to have access to Ekam Sat. When we can go deep within that, then we can understand limitations of certain theories and certain ideologies. And we can develop that fine ability like the swan of Saraswati, where we can leave the water and take the milk, or we can leave the dust and take the pearls. And we can realize the truth that is hiding in different theories, in different views. And we can understand the parts while simultaneously transcending them. For the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Just by understanding the parts, you cannot understand the whole. To understand the whole, something different has to happen within you than merely understanding the parts. For reality is not a machine. This idea of looking at reality just as a machine, even though it makes sense at a certain level, it is not total Sat. It is relatively true within a very narrow parameter of observation. And so, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti, it has layers of meaning. One is that it is pointing to the unity, the underlying unity, that all different, the ultimate truth is one, and ultimately everybody is trying to access that, whether it is through studying physics or science and trying to come to a unified theory, whether it is through following philosophy or religion. Ultimately, everybody is looking for that Sat. When we are trying to explain the universe through theories of science or theories of religion, ultimately speaking about how singularity becomes plurality, we are all looking for that Sat. We use different languages depending on what civilizational time we are in, what location of space-time continuum we find ourselves in. And so we create an exploration which best suits that time. But these theories change. They work at a certain period of time, but they change. Like 100 years ago, we had different theories. Imagine what theories we might have as a species 2,000 years from now. They will be different. But that does not mean that what we know now is absolute lie. No, it is a relevant part of the truth, relative truth to the relative location of space-time we find ourselves in. It works for now within the play. But if we do not have access to the field of truth, that is Ekam Sat, that field of Sat, then the relative truths bind us, they limit us. Then what we know becomes ignorance. For knowledge to be relevant, we have to know what we know and we have to simultaneously know what we don't. When we know what we know and we also know what we don't, then there is that deep, enthusiastic curiosity, humble intellectual curiosity, which remains, which is a crucial element of growing in knowledge. We have to have intellectual humility backed with intellectual curiosity. When we realize that Ekam Sat, that the Sat is boundless, but in different times it will express differently through inspired individuals. And if you study all theories, ultimately that's how they've arrived. Different individuals have given rise to different theories, insights, which have become, ideologies, philosophies, scientific theories. But where have they drawn these? These insights have come from that field. The field is the field of Sat. And each and every one of us has access to that. That is not just for some special cases, special individuals. That field is accessible to each and every one of us. If we can tune ourselves, that is what the whole practice, integrated practice of yoga is all about, that we can tune ourselves and we can all have access to the field of Ekam Sat. So, as mature beings, when we start to have access to this, then when we look out into the world and see the diversity of theories, of people, of languages, of beliefs and traditions, they do not overwhelm us. We are not compelled to hold on to some limiting belief in order to be right, to find safety in it. For these limiting beliefs, which often we cling to in order to find some kind of intellectual safety, underlying that is insecurity. So all that safety is being informed by this deep, unconscious insecurity. And that's what leads to conflict within and without. So when we can dive deep and we can open up and start accessing this deeper level of understanding, then this incredible field of knowledge, which shows up in this relative field of life, is no more overwhelming. For the underlying truth is the unified whole. And when we can access that boundless, then that truth, as it flows within the boundaries of space and time, is an opportunity for us to interact, to play, to dance the dance with the truth in distinct ways and distinct forms. And that is what we call the Leela. Enough for now.
You've been listening to Sattva Himalayan Wisdom. Remember to like, share, or subscribe.